It is the part of the evening that allows me to stick emeritus on the end of executive director. Kevin Bolling is relatively new to our movement, but he has a 24-year-long career of putting his secular values into action. He started off in student affairs and then went on to have a 10-year stint in immigrant and workers' rights. And most recently, he has been the director of philanthropy at the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, which, if you're not familiar with it, is an organization that sort of blends the arts and social justice together in a beautiful kind of way. And working with Kevin over the last several weeks has been really excellent. And just time and time again, whether it's with him interacting with his staff or with him at a board meeting that we had last night, I'm reminded of a story that I used to tell back when I was a younger activist about sort of like my model for activism, which was basically to like see something that I didn't think was getting done, go start to do it until other horrified people around me came over and were like, no, stop, it's cool, we got this, don't worry about it. We got it from here, we'll take care of it. And just seeing all the tasks and challenges that SSA has before it, and discussion of those getting brought up, and just watching how like smoothly and confidently like Kevin just rolls in, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this, and this is gonna be great. I cannot tell you how incredibly intensely it fills my heart with joy. After working for this, working on the SSA for 16, 17 years, depending on how you count, I could not be happier with the person who will be leading it next. So please join me in welcoming Kevin.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, thank you, August. The board meeting was interesting. We'll see how that goes. I was like, well, we're doing this, and they're like, oh, okay. But it's all good. It's moving forward. It's going to be fun. So I thought I'd start by first telling you a little bit about myself, since most of you don't know me, and don't come from this sort of background as far as in the movement. But as August was saying, I do have a long experience with social justice and nonprofit. And then I'm just going to talk a little bit about this crazy country that we live in and the impact that I think that you're going to have on it. So a little bit about me. So I grew up in a military family. My father was in the Navy, and so we moved around a lot when I was growing up. I went to 7 different schools, and then I went to college in Georgia, and then grad school in South Carolina. I've lived in 8 different states, and as well as Puerto Rico and in southern Spain. And most of my high school, I was actually in Spain. That's where we lived. And so I loved to travel. I loved being there. And I've visited 6 different continents. So I really enjoyed military life and getting to know people from all over the world and seeing different perspectives. And granted, moving around was a little difficult and making new friends all the time. But that's, again, something that I really, really enjoyed in growing up. You're probably familiar with some of the more recent work that the military has been doing with LGBT inclusion and more with women's equality within the service. When I was growing up and was younger, one of the military's primary focus was looking at racial equality within the system and within service. So while things are getting better, there's still a lot of work to be done within our military. So I also grew up in a Catholic family. So my grandparents went to church every day. So my mother was heavily involved in the church. She was on the liturgy committee. She baked the communion bread. She chose the wine that they gave out at communion. I just think that was a great excuse to be able to drink wine. But she was very involved. She's also an artist. And so she created the vestments for the priest. She did the coverings for the altar. She created these huge banners in the back of the church. So she even taught Sunday school. And I was an altar boy for years. Now my aunt, different side of the family, she believes whatever the church says. The Pope is infallible. The Bible is absolute truth. She actually believes still today, that men have one less rib than women. Now, she could easily count. However, because clearly God took the rib from Adam to create Eve. So, and this also helps support her vision that women are somehow subservient to men. So this is not what my mother believes. So my mother believes that the Bible and the church sermons are stories to help remind us to be good. And there's a lot of those that you can just ignore if you don't agree with them. So my mother spoke out consistently and loudly about the lack of equality in the church regarding women, in the liturgy and in the priesthood. So you've probably heard the quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. Well, my mother was not one of those well-behaved women. And so she was a troublemaker. And I love her for that. And she probably, and I credit her for making me the activist that I have been in my life and my interest in social justice. So jumping ahead a little bit, in college I was extremely involved. I was on the program board for a number of years. I was an orientation leader. I was an RA in housing. I was on the yearbook. I did it all. I loved it. So when I went to grad school in the University of South Carolina, Columbia, I actually got my master's in education specifically to work in student affairs, student programming, student leadership, student organizations. So for 15 years, I worked at Mankato State University in Minnesota, Northeastern University in Boston, and then I've worked at 2 public universities in Los Angeles. And so I love the energy and excitement that comes from working with a campus and working with students. I also know how important it is for students to feel safe on a campus, to feel part of the campus community, and know that there are other people like them there. So these elements are extremely important in creating environments that foster effective learning environments, and there's a ton of research that supports that. Your student organizations on campus help create those communities and create a place for secular students to feel a part of. Now, during college is the time when I started my journey away from the Catholic Church and away from religion. It was a history class. I never forget that. Just dawned, like a little light went off. I'm like, really? So at graduate school is when I figured out that I was gay. In about a week, I came out to everybody that was important to me. I don't waste a lot of time. And so I've not really been one of those well-behaved gays ever since. So I've remained very active in the LGBT community. So I was the coordinator for Boston Pride for 2 years. I've been involved with the Gay Men's Chorus. I've just made sure that I stayed involved in a lot of different things that I've done. So, but growing up, I grew up with a couple messages. One, we have to work toward racial equality, for women's equality. We've got to work for LGBT equality. The religion is a lot of stories. And that if you want someone to change something, it probably needs to be a little bit of a troublemaker, and that's okay. So this brings us to me being here with you today. And I'm really excited about getting to know you better and being able to interact with you during this conference. So I hope this conference is an amazing experience for you and that you learn brand new ways to impact your campus communities. So I've had the pleasure of hearing Archbishop Desmond Tutu speak several times. And his stories about being a lifelong South African social justice activist and his opposition to apartheid in the 1980s with Nelson Mandela are incredible. But there's one word that I will always remember from him. It's a South African word, Ubuntu, which he described as I am because you are. So that that my humanity is bound up in yours, and we can only be human together. That there's a belief in a universal bond that connects us all as humans. So if I do good to you or to someone else, if I increase the quality of your life, I'm also increasing the quality of everyone's life, including mine. We're bound in this together. So when I start to think about the current political situation, I just have to shake my head. I'm just amazed that this is where we are in 2017. So as you know, we have a president who in 140 characters almost on a daily basis, disrespects women, defies the logic and facts from our intelligence agencies and scientists, attacks other world leaders, and pretends to be Christian. Then we have Betsy DeVos. She's a pet peeve of mine. So I'm paraphrasing some of the things that she believes. So students should be allowed to be discriminated against. Schools should be allowed to discriminate against students for whatever reason they want. That the federal government should not fully protect LGBTQ and African American students from discrimination. That the federal government does not have the responsibility, even with our tax dollars, to make sure students with disabilities have access to quality education. So she wouldn't even confirm her support for the Department of Education, their guidance that colleges and universities must combat sexual assaults on campus. She has, however, confirmed her lifelong dedication to creating God's kingdom through education. And she confirms her support for conversion therapy, opposition to same-sex marriage, and the view that intelligent design should be taught in school. So all of these things directly affect you as students and your campuses. So, growing up Catholic, these are not the values that I was taught. I may not believe anymore, but I still remember. And I think it's important that, more importantly, I don't see how any of her statements are incongruent with the pledge that she took to defend our Constitution, not her Bible. So recently the Supreme Court ruled that Trinity Lutheran in Missouri was not to be excluded from receiving tax dollars just because of their religious status. So many religious and secular leaders believe that this is going to become a vehicle for funneling taxpayer dollars to private religious institutions. So, and the Trump administration, even today is working to repeal the Johnson Amendment that prevents nonprofits and churches and religious from giving money to capital campaigns. So if they do repeal or change that, this just becomes a way for religious institutions to become super PACs. So today, the Secular Student Alliance, along with some other organizations in the movement, are sending a letter to Washington to reinforce the fact that we want the Johnson Amendment unchanged and completely enforced through the federal government. Thank you. So it's injustices like these that cannot become normal. When we face sustained mediocrity, we collectively lower our standards. And with the things that we normally would say were unacceptable, suddenly don't seem so bad. So the mission of the Secular Student Alliance and your student organizations are even more important today. What you do at this conference is even more important today, and what you do on your campuses in the upcoming year is even more important. We can't be complacent, and freedom is always fragile. So since the November election, there's been a growing movement to resist. So recently in LA and in DC, we had resist marches, and it's hard to miss the hashtag resist on any form of social media. Of course, part of me gets the resist movement. You just want to say, no, you aren't going to do this. And resistance is the strategy that the Republicans have used for 8 years with the Obama administration, and the Democrats used before that and are currently using. And how well is that really working for us? So I don't think that resisting is a positive strategy for moving our society forward. And if you remember Ubuntu, we are in a collective bond of all humanity. So if we resist and we retreat to our sides, we're refusing to listen to each other, refusing to find common ground, and are we really improving the life of anybody? So even our social media, the algorithms on Google and Facebook and Instagram, all give us perspectives of things that we already believe in, and fail to give us opinions and perspectives of things we don't agree with. So the news channels we watch or read online, they're now usually from one perspective, the left or the right. So again, reinforcing only the news that supports the things we already believe in. So even without even trying, our social media is encouraging us to resist and retreat. So if we are scared, we need to speak. If you resist when you need to be active, freedom slowly dies. I firmly believe we need to engage. I think we need big, gutsy, resilient people who, when they see uncertainty, they lean forward and engage. So when we see incompetence dressed up as strategy or alternative facts, we need to point that out, that it's incompetency and it's not acceptable. This requires resilient and engaged people who believe in truth and just cause, who are going to consistently take a stand and engage. So rather than just being a participant, you must engage and inspire, so on an individual level or boldly within your own community. So I truly believe that this generation can live in a world that treats women as equals, that realizes a room only filled with men is probably not the best place to be making decisions about women's reproductive health. That this is the first generation to acknowledge and do something about institutionalized racism. This is to understand that love is love is love. To embrace that gender identity and expression are not dualistic paradigms, but this beautiful spectrum. That you can practice whatever religion you want or none at all. And that's, we have one world and we better take care of it, and we have one life that we need to make the most of. So, to paraphrase Cyndi Lauper, who I'm a child of the 80s and love her to death, and she does a lot of work on equality. She said, what would happen if we dropped the E on equality and just worked for quality? So if we tried to make the quality of life better for everyone, aren't we eventually going to get to equality? So we don't need to make America great. We need to make America truly good. So I look forward to engaging you this weekend, and I'm excited to see what you are going to be doing on your college campuses in the upcoming year. So to end, I would just want to quote Desmond Tutu again. When you do a little bit of good where you are, those little bits of good all put together then overwhelm the world. So thank you. So I have the pleasure of bringing back August, and for a little, this is his last time at SSA as the executive director, and I am extremely thankful for all he has done to help get me get up to board, and then as well as working with the staff of the Secular Student Alliance. So do you need this thing?
I do.
Oh, I'm gonna take it. Oh, I'm gonna give you that piece first.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Give it up one more time for Kevin. All right, so a thing is going to happen, which is that at 11 o'clock, they're going to get like pitchforks and force us out of here. And we're going to come like really close up to that 11 o'clock. I timed my remarks earlier, should be under 20 minutes. Maybe I'm going to go a little bit fast. So we can actually get out of here on time, because we've got a lot of fine folks in the union who are working hard and staying late in order to help us have this conference. So I want to be respectful to their time. But I do want to share some last thoughts as I step on to what's next for me. So back in 2000, I was one of 8 students and recent students who felt that there needed to be an independent support network for atheist, agnostic, and humanist groups on high school and college campuses. And I became, as Pete was talking about earlier, the 3rd executive director of the Secular Student Alliance after the first 2 burned out because they weren't getting paid. And I wasn't getting paid either, and didn't end up drawing a paycheck until 2004. And I remember having a conversation with another board member at the time, back in 2001, before I decided to take on the ED role, but after the second ED had decided that he had had enough. And I remember her telling me that, like, look, you know, odds are the Secular Student Alliance is going to die if you don't step up, because nobody else is really in a position to step up. And, you know, I just want to let you know that, like, everybody else on the board, like, isn't expecting you to, like, say this or do this, and that no one will, you know, think badly of if you don't step up. And I've thought a lot about my choice to stay and to go on to be the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance. And I'm fairly sure that I'm going to continue to have insights about that choice for the rest of my life, which is a positive way of saying that it's a choice that I still think I don't fully understand. I mean, I'm all about the Secular Student Alliance and advancing secular students, but in thinking about like me just out of college in 2001, why I decided to do that, it doesn't necessarily seem like the most logical or rational thing to have done. It certainly wasn't for the money. We've already established that. And if you're familiar with any of the survey research on Americans' attitudes towards non-believers, or you've perhaps lived as an out atheist in large sections of the United States over the last several years, you may have noticed that this was a choice that was unlikely to bring me the love and respect of broader society. And it also turned out that it was not a way to make small talk easier on airplanes. Who knew? Yeah, I have spent many an awkward flight sitting next to some poor innocent soul who uttered the words, "So what do you do?" not realizing they asked the perfect stranger next to them to basically, that they were going to be trapped with for hours, to basically say, you know, so like, what's the most controversial thing about you? And you know, initially when I got this question, I would be cagey, like, oh, like, I work for a nonprofit. Oh, what do they do? Well, we promote reason and science. Oh, that sounds good. What are they called? The Secular Student Alliance. Oh, secular. I've heard that word, but what does that mean? Oh, well, like, without religion. Oh, so you help kids go to hell. Okay. So after playing that game a few times, I sort of tried to change my tack, and before too terribly long, I ended up just saying, oh, I'm a professional atheist. And it's just like goofy and funny enough, and nobody thinks you're serious, that like you've broken the tension and gotten a little laugh before, you know, you go on to explain that, no, actually, I, you know, help support a network of like 200, or well, the number changes all the time, but, you know, hundreds of atheist, agnostic, and humanist groups across the country. And even though, like, it's the same information, like, somehow starting with humor, like, has made that easier, but I didn't even have that tool when I made the choice to become the executive director of the SSA. So I will say that a big part of making that choice was simply that I could. My own privilege was definitely a huge factor. Thanks to my grandparents, I had just finished college debt-free. And I'm quite certain that if I was servicing student loan debt, that I would not have been able to cobble together you know, a living and to make ends meet with the like part-time jobs and consulting gigs that I stitched together during that time between when I started and when I you know, started getting paid at SSA. And if I had had an ailing parent or a child or an ailing sibling or what have you, I'm also quite certain that I wouldn't have been able to do it. And I think it's really easy to watch somebody who has, you know, started an organization or written a book or whatever it is and just be like, oh, that person is so much harder working than I am or smarter than I am or what have you. And I think that in a lot of cases, like, it may just be like they had a little bit more privilege than you, and maybe like as simple as like they had a little bit more money at one little period during their life. So realize that, and also think about, you know, your own privilege and paying that forward. But that thing about debt does make me really scared and kind of sad to think about not just the like careers and families that are getting delayed because of the like huge mountains of student debt that are accumulating now, but also like how many awesome organizations aren't getting started and how many amazing other contributions to making society better are getting, you know, having the cycles that could go towards all that getting spent just towards servicing debt. So going back to why I made that choice, though, because having the privilege to make the choice is really more of a reason, like, not to say no, as opposed to a reason to say yes. So one of my first responsibilities as executive director of the Secular Student Alliance was to host and run the 2001 Secular Student Alliance Conference. And that was here at The Ohio State University. It was at a building across the way. And one of the, well, actually the keynote speaker was a fellow named Babu Gogineni. And at the time, he was the executive director of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. And I'm paraphrasing a bit, but basically, the crux of his speech was that he wanted us to not be a movement that essentially boiled down to being a petty cult vying for more members, but he wanted us to be the harbingers of freedom. And harbinging for freedom sounds like a good gig. It sounds very glamorous. And I was excited by that idea, but it also did make me think of a book by Daniel Dennett called Elbow Room. The subtitle of that book is The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. And just like there are varieties of free will that maybe, in the popular conception, that maybe aren't actually worth wanting, I also think there are lots and lots of versions of freedom that are not really worth wanting. I'm pretty excited about the version of freedom that involves graduating from college debt-free. I am significantly less excited about the version of freedom that is sort of the Marlboro Man version of freedom, where I am perfectly free to give myself cancer. So, you know, as the harbingers of the varieties of freedom worth wanting, I would like secular students to recognize yourselves as people who have been privileged enough to spend some of your time learning instead of toiling. And to realize that with that privilege, I think, comes a responsibility to actually, exactly like Kevin was saying, to engage your fellow humans who maybe haven't necessarily had that privilege, and to talk with them about how the world works and why. We're all trying to use critical thinking and empiricism to make the world a better place. Sometimes that happens in the venue of science, sometimes it happens in other ways. But the idea there, the thing we're getting at, is to replace personal prejudice with publicly verifiable fact, or at least knowledge. And I think we get hung up on the first part of that, the empiricism and the critical thinking part, and not the public understanding part. And actually realizing that if we don't go forward and publicly share what it is that we've learned about the universe and how to understand it, that we're falling short on that responsibility. And I think that that burden is sort of jointly shared by those of us who've had the privilege to learn those things, and by everybody who should have, some responsibility to understand the world better. But we can't change how, a creationist understands evolution. We can change how good our explanations are. And like Matt was saying earlier in his panel, we can also change our relationship to people and make them realize that we value them by spending time with them and talking with them. And those are things that we have control over, and I think those things are existentially important. And as you do those things, I cannot urge you strongly enough to cast away the temptation to mobilize your base instead of going out and engaging people that you disagree with. I think that run to that kind of political tactic is a huge part of what is degrading our politics right now in the United States. And whether you're a professional atheist or not, though, if you're being authentic about those things and you're living up to them, it will occasionally mean being in a conversation and wishing very, very badly that the person sitting next to you had exercised just a little bit more skepticism when someone told them that Darwin converted on his deathbed and therefore the evolution is a hoax. Perhaps you would not even wish that they had exercised enough skepticism to not believe it themselves, but maybe that they had exercised at least enough skepticism to not repeat it to you while you were sitting there on an airplane with them. Or for that matter, that they had actually taken just a little bit of time to think about the implications of what they were told. That, you know, perhaps our lives are very rich and complicated, and sometimes brilliant people make mistakes. And maybe that we don't always do our clearest thinking when we're on our deathbed. And that there are many hell-believing believers who accept evolution, and it doesn't make evolution any less plausible. So, you know, be prepared to stretch your comfort zone when you are chatting and engaging with some of your fellow people about what's going on. And think about how you might be preparing this person for their next conversation down the road, and that they might be preparing you for your next conversation down the road. And as you go out and you engage, I do have 3 requests of you. I request that you be critical, I request that you be nurturing, and I request that you be practical. So criticism is often criticized. And we've probably all heard the Roosevelt man in the arena quote. It's become pretty popular lately. But I don't expect you all to have it memorized, so here it goes. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly. I will wait one moment while this automated announcement comes on.
Attention guests. The time is now 10:45 and the Ohio Union will close in 15 minutes. All patrons must exit the building at that time. Again, the Ohio Union will close in 15 minutes and all patrons must exit the building at that time.
I will get you on time, I promise. Okay, but we were getting marred in sweat and blood. Okay, all right. Whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end triumph or of high achievement, and at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I encourage you to get into the arena and get some dust and sweat and blood on your face as you criticize ideas that don't make sense to you. And I want you all to dare greatly in your inquiry and know the victory of useful criticism and the defeat of being wrong about other people being wrong. And I want you to dare just as greatly in your willingness to nurture others. That means younger leaders in your group, of course. It too means people who think that Darwin converted on his deathbed. It further means so many people that although it might be impossible to believe now, are going to look up at you and wonder how it is you accomplished that thing that you accomplished. And it further means not only nurturing the people whose very ideas you're critical of, but it means nurturing people who are going to go on to be critical of your ideas. Lastly, as you go forth and harbinge the varieties of free will or of freedom worth wanting, above all else, I implore you to be practical. Look for what works. Be open to things that you think won't work. Nurture your curiosity about what might work, and be critical of your preconceptions about what does work. Well, I can't draw my time at the Secular Student Alliance to a close without rolling the credits. Now, don't worry. I'm still going to get you out of here in time. I'm not going to name names. I'm sure that if I tried to, I would forget people. And I also know that most of you are probably just going to be listening for your own name as I list off names. Just let me assure all of you I love you and you are all critical to my success. Back in college, there was a speaker at an awards ceremony I was at, and she told us that excellence requires others. And I found that to be incredibly true over and over again. Be it my grandparents or parents, or the folks who started the group that is now Secular Student Alliance at Ohio State, and all the leaders who have run it since, or all the amazing staffers and consultants and board members who I've learned so much from over the years, or the people who are willing to nurture me, or help me be more critical of my own ideas, or help me weave them together in a practical way. I can't tell you how important all of those people have been. I encourage you to seek out mentors aggressively, And I encourage you to fanatically learn from both those who end up reporting to you and to those that you report to. I'll also say that I have mentors who have helped me understand my time with the SSA, and mentors who have challenged me to think hard about my time at the SSA. I had a mentor who would often ask me, would Martin Luther King Jr. be comfortable at a Secular Student Alliance event? Basically getting down to, why does it matter? Liz is holding up a sign that I can't see at all. I know I'm almost out of time. Yeah, well, it's going to be a little longer than that. I know, I'm working on it. Okay, basically, why is it that someone who possesses a belief in God or gods and fights for justice with ferocity and efficacy shouldn't be welcome? And I just want to be really, really clear that the SSA is an inclusive organization. I'm not going to read it because I'm running out of time, but on our website, on our minimum statement, there's a thing about how the groups need to be inclusive. But there's also a thing about how they need to be naturalistic. And I think this boils down to, MLK would definitely be welcome at our groups, but the thing that I kind of wonder about is, would he care? Would he be interested? Would he be attracted? And I think it's worth knowing that the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, at which King gave his I Have a Dream speech, was organized by A. Philip Randolph, who was an atheist. It seems clear to me that King was far more interested in justice in this world than in any other world. And it also seems clear to me that many of our fellow citizens are more interested in justice in this world than any other, regardless of whatever religion they hold. But how many of today's Martin Luthers are interested in teaming up with our A. Philip Randolphs? And for that matter, how many A. Philip Randolphs are interested in teaming up with a movement that is so forward in terms of naturalism? So I have a lot of ideas about answers to that question that I throw out here, and I could throw them out, and you can come talk to me about them later, perhaps tomorrow. I'm not going to throw them out right now, because basically it boils down to, I think there are a lot of different answers, and over my years I've become more and less comfortable with different answers, and if you have some of those answers, I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to talk with you about them. Really quickly, I wouldn't be able to finish this without giving a blessing, because it's the atheist way. I perform humanist weddings, and I wanted to leave you with this, this blessing. Unfortunately, the state of Ohio has not given me the power to marry all of you, so I will have to bless your groups instead of your marriages. But here goes. May your groups be places of happiness for all who enter them, and places where the old and the young are renewed in each other's company. Places for growing, places for laughter, places for music. And when shadows and darkness fall within their spaces, may they still be places of hope and strength for all who enter them. May no person be alien to your compassion. May your larger family be the family of all humankind. And may those nearest to you and dearest to you constantly be enriched by the beauty and the bounty of your love for each other. Thank you.